This documentary by China's state broadcaster is Beijing's latest attempt to describe its activities in the country's western province of Xinjiang as a counter-terrorism operation. But the US government isn't buying the story. Washington says the state is oppressing Uyghur Muslims in the region, and the US Congress has authorized President Donald Trump's administration to slap sanctions on Beijing.
Beijing's opaque military buildup, reckless indifference to its internal obligations, and disinformation campaigns endanger us all. We all must be alert to the Chinese Communist Party's threat to our way of life.
But the Chinese government denies the allegations and is threatening to retaliate.
Once again, we urge the US side to immediately correct its mistakes and stop using the relevant bill to harm China's interests and interfere in China's internal affairs. Otherwise, the Chinese side will resolutely fight back and the US side must bear all consequences.
The flare-up comes just as the two sides call a truce on some other disputes. Earlier this week, Washington allowed more flights to and from the mainland, stepping back from an earlier threat to ban Chinese carriers. And the Commerce Department allowed US companies to work with Chinese telecom giant Huawei on setting 5G standards. That's after it accused the firm of spying on behalf of Beijing and blacklisted it. While the US government moves one step forward and two steps back with Beijing, Trump's former national security advisor John Bolton says his tough talk against Beijing is a ruse. Bolton accuses Trump of seeking President Xi Jinping's help to get re-elected.
Bolton, then national security advisor, recounts how he watched the president, in his words, plead with Xi to cut a deal with the United States on trade. This is at a time when the two nations were in the middle of a trade war that was taking a toll on both of their economies, and encouraging the Chinese government to buy more U.S. farm products with the explicit purpose of helping his own re-election campaign.
Trump denies the allegations leveled against him in Bolton's book, which goes on sale on Tuesday.
Terrible thing that he did, but he broke the law. Very simple. I mean, as much as it's going to be broken, this is highly classified. That's the highest stage. It's highly classified information.
Trump's threatening more actions against Beijing, like rejecting a proposal by Google and Facebook to lay an undersea internet cable between Hong Kong and mainland China. And some analysts say the upcoming US elections could lead to even more saber-rattling between the world's largest economies. Mubin Nasir, TRT World.
For more on this, Doug Barry joins us now from Washington. He's Senior Communications Director at the US-China Business Council. Welcome to Money Talks, Doug. Now, first, we have this ongoing damaging trade war between the US and China. Then we have the coronavirus pandemic for which the US blames China. Then we have this controversial national security law that Beijing looks to impose on Hong Kong. And now this law that looks to slap sanctions on Chinese officials over the repression of Uyghur Muslims. Just how bad is the current state of the US-China relationship?
Well, Oscar, as you suggested, that anyone that is following this and has been following it over the past few months, it makes it seem like your head is going to explode with all of these issues. I think it's important, though, to focus on what's working, and that is the efforts to bring into being the agreement between the U.S. and China, so-called Phase 1 agreement. It seems to be moving along very well, although there has been some hiccups. And in this agreement, the Chinese have agreed to buy $200 billion over the 2017 levels over the next 24 months. And so far, Ambassador Lighthizer told Congress yesterday he believes that the Chinese are going to make the commitment and that this is one bright spot in the relationship.
Yes, let's look at that first phase trade deal which was signed in January. As you say, Robert Lighthizer reassured Congress that things were on track, but of course his comments have been overshadowed by explosive claims made by the former US National Security Advisor John Bolton about that very agreement. Now, John Bolton, in his new upcoming book, says that during trade negotiations made at the G20 summit back in Japan last year. He says Donald Trump basically appealed to Chinese President Xi Jinping to buy more US agricultural goods to help him win the 2020 presidential election. What do you make of such an extraordinary claim, which, as we know, if true, is illegal?
Yes, well, of course, I wasn't in the room when those conversations were taking place, so I can't authoritatively comment on them. But to use your metaphor, yes, the relationship has been overshadowed, and the Phase 1 agreement has been overshadowed to some extent by these revelations of the last couple of days. But I think it's important that reasonable people don't allow that overshadowing to obscure the fact that the agreement is going well. And remember, it's more than just the agricultural purchases. Remember that the U.S. farmers were suffering a great deal because of the punitive tariffs that the Trump administration laid on. And as a result, purchases of these key agricultural commodities for U.S. farmers went to virtually zero as of 7 or 8 months ago. Now the Chinese are buying again as a result of the agreement. And in addition to the agricultural purchases, the agreement also includes a lot of other things, such as greater protection of intellectual property, opening of financial services markets to U.S. companies, both of which seem to be heading in the right direction. And their purchases of other things, such as energy products. And Ambassador Lighthizer said that it's very likely that the Chinese will be announcing soon very large purchases of ethanol, which, as you know, comes from corn. And then there is also other agreements concerning services, including tourism. So it all equals $200 billion in 24 months, and it seems like we're on track to meet those obligations. And it's important not to allow the other noise in the room to overshadow those important realities.
So even though diplomatic relations between the two countries seem to be at such a low right now, you're quite optimistic about the business relationship between the two countries?
Well, for the short term anyway, I think it's very difficult to, predict what will happen. It seems like there is a surprise a week that's taking place. So certainly there's always the possibility that the business economic side of the relationship could be shunted aside with some of these other more emotional and complicated issues. But the hope is that both the Chinese side and the U.S. government side, certainly the private sector, farmers, ranchers in the United States, want that agreement to be successful and will be trying very hard to make sure that they stay on course.
Isn't it? As we know, we do have a presidential election coming up in November. Do you think Donald Trump is the best person to lead the US in terms of its relationship with its biggest competitor, China?
I can't really comment on the election and the election's prospects, but what I can say is that the relationship between the US and China has fundamentally changed. There will be areas in which we can agree and things that we will disagree on. Hopefully we can do so without resorting to violence. And hopefully, at the end of the day, we will be able to find things which we can work on together. And by those, these are very large international issues and challenges, such as making sure that the SARS pandemic is halted, and that medicines are created to stop its spread. And that further health problems are, prevented as a result of the cooperation between the U.S. and China. There are other issues. Economic development is another part of it. So there are many areas in which we both need to cooperate, must cooperate in the future. It's for the benefit of both countries and for the world. And whoever becomes president in November is going to have to face that world. And hopefully we will be able to put a bottom under the relationship and find ways like business and trade and commerce where we can work together and reset the relationship in a positive way.
Yes, and as we know, a lot can happen between now and November. Doug Barry from the US-China Business Council, thanks so much for joining us on the program.